Hey guys, okay. So, this is a video that I've wanted to do for a while now. I've actually recorded clips for it twice. And one of them got deleted, and the other, I had it almost fully spliced together, and I just didn't feel good about it. I didn't feel like I'd done enough, like testing, I guess. I don't know. It just didn't feel like I'd done it thoroughly. So I went back and redid it, and for some reason, my line of thinking just changed, and I tested something I'd never tested before. So I'm really glad it worked out this way. So this video will be over time modulation in Hades Star, and you have two sources of it. You have your time modulator, and you have a time warp module on ships. That, and they basically work the same way. The modulator has a 10-minute duration, and the speed up increases by 25% with every level. And the time warp module is roughly the same. It has a limited radius and a shorter duration, and it increases 10% every module level. And so the way they work is they effectively speed up anything in the game with a timer, whether it's ships repairing, planets upgrading, your counter on your planets for when shipments get delivered. It can speed that up. It can speed up how fast artifacts get researched. It speeds up ship movement and basically everything else. The only thing to my knowledge that it doesn't speed up is if you have a module researching, it won't speed that up. And as per the commonly held idea is it doesn't affect combat, which is kind of true, it's kind of not true. It will shorten your shield durations, and it will also shorten cooldown duration for any mod you have, as well as shortening how long they last. So if you're EMP'd, it's got a 30-second duration. Well, if you pop time warp, it's still going to say that it's 30 seconds, but it's actually going to pass by much quicker, 1.6 times quicker. So you can definitely affect how combat works with time warp, and you see a lot of that in white stars. And time warp's power really gets kind of obvious in white stars because you may be running a flight plan that takes you a day and a half to get from point A to point B, and popping time warp takes it down to 25 hours, 26 hours, something like that. It can get ridiculous, and because it's that long drawn out process, it's a lot more prominent, but it works in red stars and blue stars as well. Apparently the newest meta for blue stars right now is time warp, because if you pop your shields and pop time warp at the very beginning of the blue star, then you should get to reactivate your shields about 2 or 3 minutes remaining, which is kind of nice. But past that, the main standing point has been that except for modules and shields, time warp doesn't affect combat. And the issue I've had with this is it feels like it should. It literally just speeds up how fast things happen, right? So if two ships are fighting and they're both in time warp, then it would make sense that the same outcome would happen, right? It's just going to happen faster. So if it takes you a minute to kill a Guardian, if you have time warp on, it should take you 45 seconds or something like that. And I mean, that is just how everything else in the game works that way. So it doesn't really make sense to me that it wouldn't work. The issue with this is it never feels good. There's been several times where I'll be in a fight and either I'm impatient or I'm running out of time or something, and you know, I'll drag my transports in and pop time warp and start loading artifacts. And you know, right next to them there's a battle happening and I'm just sure I'm going to win, so it's not a big deal. But it always feels like I get a lot more damage on my ships, or I come into situations where I'm just like, man, that was way closer than I thought it was going to be. And you know, that still happens sometimes, but for the most part, like, after you run so many red stars of a certain level, you really kind of get used to the patterns and you know how it feels. So for Time Warp not to be doing anything in combat kind of feels weird to the rest of the game's mechanics. And for Time Warp not to be doing anything in combat, it always makes it feel different. Like, there is a noticeable change when you have Time Warp in combat. And so, you know, I've tested it a little bit on and off, and I finally just decided that I was going to take a full-on Mythbusters approach to this and do it as scientifically as I could in game. So that's what I've got, and these clips are pre-recorded, so I will splice them in here and I will just talk in between them. All right, so this is the first take, and this is just straight up battery, no time warp at all. So shields at 3200. And for these first four, I didn't speed up the playtime at all because I wanted it to be true to life, like the actual amount of time that it takes to do this stuff. And I think it's 9.5 seconds. So check. Yeah, so it's just slightly over 9 seconds. So there you go. That was that. And now this is same ship, same shields, everything. And I'm going to pop time warp on it. $3,200. Now, so if time warp affected battery the way it affects everything else, then what should happen here is the exact same amount of damage should get done, but it should happen faster. And the thing is, it doesn't. It happens exactly the same amount of time, slightly over 9 seconds. It does do exactly the same amount of damage, 1100 left. And so, I mean, that pretty much told me that just because of the time thing, it's obvious to me that time warp isn't affecting battery at all. But just to be thorough and make sure that I had this as scientific as I could get it, I'm going to do it here and try to keep the time warp just on my ship. I think it actually works in this clip. Yeah, I end up killing it before it even makes it into the time warp. So see here, if it affected it, see, I have 1100 shield strength again. If it affected it, I should have actually killed it before it did that much damage. All right. And so here was my last try, and I mean, it was obvious to me that this wasn't going to work, but just for the sake of science, I wanted to test it and see if I could get to where the time warp was on the enemy. Basically, just a reversal. And was actually really hard to set up. I think I did this like 3 times, and for some reason I kept getting situations like this. But this was the first one where the Sentinel actually attacked my battleship. A lot of them just sat there, and I was like, if I wanted you to sit here during a red star, you wouldn't. You would charge me. But whatever. This kind of works. I get in for part of it. I didn't want to lose a transport doing something stupid, so there you go. Got him a little bit. If it was gonna do more damage, it should have done a little bit more to me, and it doesn't. 1100 again. All right. Okay, so that was your general overview, and it's pretty obvious, right? I mean, it's pretty cut and dry that Time Warp in no way, shape, or form affected damage output or damage taken or anything else. Now, hypothetically, it could actually be a detriment because if you have Time Warp on, then your shields are going to burn out faster for their time duration, not their health, which means you may have to pop them more often, which is probably a bad thing. It could be a good thing if you need them to come back up or something, but just in combat in and of itself, it doesn't feel good. So that is basically the point I'd gotten to last time. I didn't have a as exhaustive of a look at it. I just had 2 or 3 different tests, and they all came out the same, and I was like, well, that proves it. But so that's where I got to, and I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm a moron. Maybe I just don't have a feel for it like I thought I did. Maybe something else was going on that I didn't really think about. And so I went and started up a RS6, and I was just like, okay, whatever. Apparently it doesn't do anything. I'm in a hurry. I'm gonna pop Time Warp, get the relics out, and be done. And I did it, and I got crushed by just a Colossus. Absolutely destroyed. And I was lucky to get my transports out, and I was just like, I don't understand what happened. I'm pretty sure I just proved that Time Warp didn't do anything. So what happened? And I was thinking about it. I was like, okay, well, so Time Warp obviously speeds up EMP. And if you're under Time Warp, your EMP isn't going to last as long. Now that, okay, I get it, right? So the Colossus wasn't stunned as much as it usually is, but I mean, honestly, I can beat Colossus just by juggling. I don't even really have to stun them. So something's still off, right? Like this, it was way too bad. I should have at least, beat him and had one ship just limping along or something, but there's no way that I went in like that and just lost. So I was really looking at it. I was like, okay, so Time Warp sped up my Omega shields, but in that scenario, it's a good thing. The faster they go off, the faster I can turn them back on, and it's not like I was skimping for Hydro or something. So that wasn't the issue. The other 2 ships are passives, which means that Time Warp is not going to do anything to them when they're at full health. And if they've been hurt and you stop taking damage, then Time Warp is going to make them recharge faster. Okay, so for both sets of shields, Time Warp is a positive. So what am I missing? I was like, okay, well, the only other thing I can think of is either I screwed up so badly that I couldn't out-juggle the Time Warp, and maybe, you make a 2-minute mistake, or a 2-second mistake in normal time under Time Warp, that's like 4 seconds lost or something, so maybe that was it. The only other thing I could think of was lasers. Why they would be different, I have no idea, except they have a charge time. So I went through and I was like, okay, well, sure, let's test it, see what happens. All right, so for the laser tests, I sped up how it went. First of all, bigger ship, better gun. But watching a laser ship just melt down a Guardian is boring, very, very boring. So I sped it up just to kind of show you my purpose. And this is your control for how much damage I take with no time warp at all. And you can tell from the charging bar exactly. This is ×2 speed, I think. Maybe slightly more. 4960. Boom. Okay, so then the next test, this is just going to be time warp over myself. Although it shouldn't matter. I didn't think about this while I was recording it, but I've already proven that the time warp doesn't affect the battery damage at all. I could have just used time warp on the laser ship, but whatever. And you can kind of tell, even though this is, twice the speed, it's the same increase as the other clip. So look at how much faster the battery charges up, though, even compared to the last one. And so as soon as I did this, I knew. I was like, okay, it's completely obvious that time warp is affecting the laser charge time. 5260. So, not a huge thing, but it could be. You can go up against Colossus. There's a lot more shield strength and a lot more hull strength, and they use lasers. So I ran this test just as my ship getting in range with the Colossus and opening fire until somebody dies, and in that kind of a fight, it's always going to be you. At least 1v1 anyway. But I thought this was pretty much a perfect test because we will burn through each other's shields, and the Colossus has salvage, so it will heal itself when my ship dies, but you can use the lowest health it ever has as your benchmark for how much damage gets done. I'm going to put it back to normal speed. 37,305. Okay. And here is your test with time warp only on my ship. Eventually. What I had to do. Oh, this is because I had to clear the planet, and then I repaired my ship to make sure that it was at full strength, and I was waiting on the shield to recharge. Okay, we're good. My side ship has the time warp. Okay. So. This actually took me a while to set up. It was even harder with Colossus. And like you can see here, I had to actually have another ship that would fly in and kill that Sentinel. Trying to set these up where your time warp only affects your ships, it is kind of difficult. It's okay if you're the attacking person, like right here, but if you're relying on them to move, you never know which side of the asteroid or the planet or whatever they're going to dock on, and it's not always obvious just from where they are to where they're going. So I think that in itself kind of, as you can see, boom, here, fully charged. This guy's at roughly 66%. So it's obvious that not only does it work, but at least for the GUI, it's a pretty accurate representation of where the boundary of that time warp is, which I figured it would be, but it is interesting to note that it's not dragging that Colossus into my time warp just because they're in combat or anything, random. And here your final hull strength is 35,317. All right, so there's your kind of capstone for that whole thing. I have no idea why it works the way it works. And honestly, it makes almost no sense to me. Basically, it's not going to change your DPS directly. So if you're using dual lasers with one target and it never heats up, then you're going to do the same amount of damage. Or from the moment your single laser hits full charge, it's still going to do the same damage per second that it would do normally. The only thing that changes is how quickly you move from no charge to full charge. So, having said that, I did the math on it. It's 2012 damage difference between my two takes with the Colossus. And that's not a lot, but I was thinking that it was about a 66%. When my lasers got to full, the enemies were about 66%. So all lasers charge up in 45 seconds. And so if I have level 5 time warp, that is 1.6. And so I can do that in my head, but basically 100 divided by 1.6 is 62%. So it's pretty close. So that's the entire difference. And so I looked at those numbers and I was a little less than impressed, I guess. It feels like it should have been something a lot more to have done that much of a difference, right? But the difference is that Colossus are built to be laser ships, right? They have insanely high shields, insanely high hull strength, and I'm pretty sure, I am sure that their hull is stronger than you can ever get on a player ship. I'm pretty sure their shields are too. I'm not positive about that one, but even if it's not, it's probably close. And so they're already kind of built around this idea of, I don't care that you're going to shoot me because I'm going to get my laser fully charged up, and it's not going to matter anymore because I'm still going to destroy you faster than you destroy me. So that's interesting, right? As for whether or not it's a viable strategy, I think the answer is almost certainly no. Lasers, I'm a pretty big defender of single laser, at least up to level 5 and at least up to RS6. But I think RS6 is probably the last time that they're ever really, really viable. I mean, you can run them. And, I think a majority of the time they're not really going to do all that much worse. But I think after RS6, the frequency that they're better is going to drop off significantly. Now, yeah, you could run time warp with it to kind of maximize that, and that's fine, except if you're up against Colossus, then the only way you really gain anything out of it is if you can keep the time warp on you and off of them. Because the thing you have to remember here is that, say you have a laser and 2 battery ships, and you just pop time warp right in the middle of it, the time warp isn't affecting the battery's DPS at all. So it's not changing, 2/3 of your ships aren't getting a buff, but the buff to the Colossus is significant. And considering that it, is kind of already built around this idea of being one big, strong ship, a buff is not a smart thing to give to your enemy. I think it could be viable if you only ran lasers. And to be frank, the difference between laser and battery is a fairly close cut. And I mean, a 33% boost to its efficiency is probably enough that you could say, hey, this is just better. But it's only better when you're running time warp. And again, if you're in I mean, actually, if you're running like 3 laser ships and you never go up against a Colossus, it's a straight buff. Totally worth it. But if you're running up against a Colossus, then you're putting it on the same ground, right? So it basically, you might as well be using 3 lasers against the Colossus with no time warp. Be exactly the same math, right? So yeah, I mean, that's the differential. Wouldn't be surprised if at some point the devs make a CERB that gives time warp just for that purpose. Probably would be scary. Probably like RS11 or something, I don't know. But it could be done. I don't think it's really viable in Red Stars. Mostly because it's a lot of work for not a lot of payout. And the rest of my reasoning there is it's just too hard to set up. You have to get it on a paper thin line, and you're banking that there will be an asteroid you can park some other ship at to get the time warp on you, but not the enemy. And the only way you can get that landing down right is if you attack the Colossus at his asteroid. If you let it move to you, there's almost no way you can predict where it's going to be positioned, as far as I know. So it may be more viable in blue stars. People are using time warp there, and the whole battlefield constantly shrinks. So I think that seems like a good place for lasers, just because they can't run from you. But by the same token, maybe that would just mean they fight you earlier or more often. I don't know. I don't really think that it works, but it was interesting. It was fun. And I'm glad that I figured it out, because it's been bothering me basically since RS5. So I was really curious and I enjoyed doing it. So there you go. I will try to get something a little bit less technical out next week. Maybe a little bit more entertaining or something. But for now, that's all I've got. So thanks. We'll catch you later.